Hello. Testing 1, 2. Let's see if this works. This is my first attempt here at getting this concept going. Should find out in a second here. Awesome. Sounds good. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Outside In Games' new segment, Outside In News, where our goal is to give you the most important information and highlights of the gaming news from the previous month. This is our first go at this. There's going to be some rough edges. If you're watching this after the fact, please give us some comments and tell us how we can improve. We'll consider them as we move forward. Since this is our first broadcast, I'll break down to you what we're trying to do here before we jump into the news. There's a lot that goes on in any given month. Figuring out all that happened takes some time. So what we're trying to do is figure out what the most important information is, particularly as it impacts game development, and try to surface those things so that you can see that, basically. So I'm going to be going over a bunch of different news, and we're going to... The format for this time around is that basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by going over what the news is grouped primarily by company, and then we'll try to figure out a format for this as we move, which makes more sense if it makes more sense to go chronologically or whatever as we go. We decided this time around that chronologically didn't make a whole lot of sense because we're tracking a full month of news, which can then change from day to day. So it just made sense to kind of like wrap up the entire news item all at once rather than trying to give you pieces of it through as it happened throughout the month. So what we've tried to do is break this down into broad categories that sort of make sense. So starting with platform owners, moving into hardware manufacturers, and then into publishers. And following that, we'll get into a few more broad topics and then list off a bunch of other tidbits. I kind of want to just report the news as news first, and then we'll get into kind of opinion-based like insights after that. So without further ado, let's start our first segment. And get this going. So first off here is Nintendo. Some news about their kind of like overall strategy here is that they had a major stock split. They went from a 10-to-1 reduction in the price of stock. In Japan, investors currently still need to purchase shares around 100 at a time. And as such, the previous price of entry would have been around $41,000. So now that price is closer to about $4,100, which makes it a little bit more accessible. Outside of Japan, this probably won't affect you that much if you're interested in investing. But when you're going in that large of amounts, obviously that makes a big difference. Next item here. There was also a direct this month. However, in the UK, this direct had to be put on delay because of the Queen's death. This is likely due to the new Legend of Zelda game being announced, with its name being revealed, which was called Tears of the Kingdom, which has come somewhat of an unfortunate name considering that the United Kingdom had their monarch pass away. The game also got its release date of May 12th, 2023. So that's kind of the big news from the Direct. Pikmin 4 was also announced at the event, alongside a few other games. Nintendo also has seemingly removed the gacha mechanic in their Mario Kart Tour, which used to be the way to acquire racers in that game. They're now switching it over to a item shop, so there will not be a gacha mechanic. moving on to here we have the Microsoft PC app got a How Long to Beat integration. How Long to Beat is a website which allows you to check out a game and how long it takes to beat that game in certain types of categories. So main story, completionist, etc. So that's a new thing for the interface. The Xbox Series and Xbox One now also have Discord integration. So straightforward. Microsoft announced Xbox Project Amplify, which is an outreach program to help increase the Black representation in game development by putting out a series of content videos highlighting some of the Black employees within Microsoft in a hope to encourage education for Black youth interested in game development. Also announced by Microsoft is a Logitech streaming-only console for $300 US, which will, after the initial launch window, be up to $350. This is called the Logitech G Cloud. It is a partnership with Tencent and Logitech. And for that money, you get a 7-inch 1080p screen with a 12-hour battery life and what they call precision gaming controls. It is currently powered by Android 11 and supports Xbox Game Pass and NVIDIA's GeForce Now. You can also stream your Steam library with Steam Link. Yeah. There is a new Xbox Elite controller. It is a cheaper alternative to the Elite Series 2, which was launched for $129.99 US, with the idea that instead of including all separate swappable pieces, you get a standard set with other pieces purchased separately as a pack. Microsoft also now enables users to customize the LED color of the Xbox button, so there's a little bit of a bonus. Activision Blizzard acquisition. So this is still under kind of Microsoft news. So the $68 billion Activision acquisition seems to be hitting some more speed bumps. UK regulators are currently investigating how it's going to impact their competition. It's similar kind of to the anti-monopoly laws in the US. They're trying to make sure that their consumers are protected. Sony has also become very outspoken against the merger. And this, yeah, let's see. This is a similar occurrence. Yeah. Basically what's happening to Microsoft in this situation is similar to what happened with the NVIDIA ARM attempted acquisition that happened a couple of years ago, or in the last couple of years, which did not go through as NVIDIA had withdrawn its proposal earlier this year. In other Activision Blizzard news, Overwatch 1. Yeah, no, this is different. Man, I need to come up with breakpoints in these articles. This is something that's good to know. All right. In other Activision Blizzard news, Overwatch 1 was announced to be shutting down this month and, last month, to make way for Overwatch 2, which has now transpired. This was done with a gap of a day between the two, seemingly in preparation for the servers to be reused and allow for a more cost-effective and smoother transition. Sony. Sony announced at the end of August it was increasing the PS5 pricing in most regions. As of September 15th, Japan was the most recent and final country to have been announced where this would be taking place. PSVR 2 was announced back in August, but there was some more news about it this month. It will not be backwards compatible with PSVR 1. Hideaki Nishino, the SVP of Platform Experience, explained on the PlayStation podcast, this is a quote, PSVR games are not compatible with the PSVR 2 because PSVR 2 is designed to deliver a truly next-generation virtual reality experience. PSVR 2 has much more advanced features like an all-new controller with haptic feedback and adaptive triggers. Adaptive triggers, as I've said, and inside-out tracking. Eye tracking in it. 3D audio is coming together. 4K HDR, of course. So this means developing games for PSVR requires a whole different approach than the original PSVR. More on that later. Steam. Steam's interface got a couple of new updates. They've improved visibility of some games by adding a chart to see the most played and best-selling games on the marketplace. It also has weekly charts as well as regional filters. They also updated the store hubs. If you browse by category, you can see each category is personalized and has subcategories. The Steam Deck dock was also shown for the first time at the Tokyo Game Show. As of today, it is now available for order at $89 US. Valve has also opened the official Steam Deck repair centers, so it can, now that it can sell the console without pre-orders, it has capacity that it's opening up for repairs as it's necessary. Going along with the trend of anime-like mascots for Asian regions, Valve has announced Steam Pal. This is kind of in the same line as Unity, having Unity-chan, or there's one for Explorer, now Edge. Google. This is kind of the bigger news that has happened in some ways. Obviously, it won't impact many people, but Stadia is officially shutting down and refunding purchases. This will go into full effect in January. They have halted all sales of controllers and accessories on their site. As you can see here, it appears that some of the developers were not given a heads up on the information, as several came out on Twitter to exclaim their surprise. Ubisoft and IO Interactive announced during this period that they are attempting to find ways to transfer their saves over to other platforms. Currently, there are a handful of Stadia exclusives. The list is Hello Engineer, which is a Hello Neighbor co-op spinoff. Pixel Junk Raiders, which is a third-person roguelike. Outcasters, which is a top-down combat game. Pac-Man Mega Tunnel Battle, which is a battle royale-style Pac-Man. And Guilt, which is kind of a horror game. So far, there's been some movement by some of the developers to port these titles, but we'll need to see which ones do make it off the platform. It appears that the display items that were from the original announcement in this kind of like kiosk setting are being sold off for charity by the owner of the items. The owner admitted in an email with Kotaku that they had expected that this would occur, and they actually kept the items in storage for this purpose. Google Play for PC beta is now soft launching in some regions, which in theory will allow you to run Android apps in Windows 10 and 11. New platform basically opening up for people in wake of Stadia shutting down. Here is Apple news. In terms of game development related news for Apple, it's harder to pick out exactly what's of use and what isn't. Right now, we have the fact that there was a price adjustment going on for Euro-based apps, and that has now taken place as of October 5th, 2022. And it increases the price in Chile, Egypt, Japan, Malaysia, Pakistan, Poland, South Korea, Sweden, and Vietnam. The iPhone 14 was also announced alongside iOS 16, which now supports Joy-Cons, which was not officially announced, but discovered by an emulator developer. So there's some new stuff there. Epic Games, excuse me. Epic Games Store just got its first Web3 game, Blanco's Block Party. Web3 is a marketing term that basically equates to the use of blockchain. The Epic Store has also gotten a new feature. They have finally gotten a type of folder in the form of collections for sorting your library and a favorites list. All right, so now we're going to move into the hardware. So, first up, we have NVIDIA. Hardware has been, actually, before we get into NVIDIA specifically, there's been quite a bit of hardware that was announced in September. So we're going to go through, basically every company announced something. Whether or not it will directly impact games, we'll have to see, but some of the technologies that are announced here may be technologies that will impact games, so we're just going to list off what we can. First of all, the 4000 series was announced by the RTX 4000 series was announced by NVIDIA. Portal is the next game to get the RTX update treatment. DLSS 3 was announced to go along with these cards, which has some new technology into how they're doing super sampling. How that works out, we will have to see. The MSRP for the 4090 will be $1,600 with the 4080 coming in two flavors, a 16 gigabyte model and a 12 gigabyte model, which have different chips, different speeds, different core counts, and a different sized bus. They have the 16 gigabyte version will be at 1200 as an MSRP, and the 12 gigabyte version is an MSRP of 900. EVGA also announced to cut ties with NVIDIA. They were supposedly upset with how they were treated as a partner, so we will not see any EVGA 40 series chips, or 4000 series chips, however you want to call that. We have also Razer's Edge 5G announced as another streaming console. It's by Razer. It is the Edge 5G. This is a partnership with Verizon for the 5G version, or for the 5G technology. The dev kit shown was seen almost a year ago in November 2021. It has a 6.65-inch OLED, 120 hertz display, 1080p webcam, and 4-way speakers. How this translates to the final product, we do not know yet. Full details are likely to be out tomorrow, so on October 15th, so stay tuned. Intel. Intel shows its new graphics cards targeted at the mid-range this month, or last September. The Intel Arc A770 and A750 are priced at $329 and $289 respectively. The company has stated that the main engineers and other employees of Intel have stated basically that if you do not have resizable bar or smart access memory, which are two terms for the same technology, whereby the graphics card and the memory, the graphics card can share memory with the CPU, then you should buy a competitor's card. This limits Intel's 10th gen and newer, or Ryzen's 3000 and newer chips. Basically, if you do not have one of 10th, 11th, 12th, or now 13th gen chips by Intel, or the Ryzen 3000 or 5000 or 7000 series AMD chips, then you should not buy these cards. XeSS has launched Intel's version of super sampling, so how that rates compared to FSR, which is AMD's, or DLSS as NVIDIA's, we will have to see. Based on early information, it appears that these cards have relatively good ray tracing performance, and XeSS seems to be pretty effective. However, older titles appear to perform a lot worse due to emulation of older DirectX and initial focus on DirectX 12 rather than older models of or older software suites of DirectX. Intel also announced that they are retiring the Pentium and Celeron brands, and they're now calling their low-end processors Intel processors. AMD has also announced cards. So we have 3 sets of cards that were announced in September. The Radeon RX 7000 will have an official announcement. It's still like in rumored state at this point. They announced an announcement effectively for November 3rd. FSR 2.1 was released, making improvements for their quality targeting issues with ghosting from previous versions. The Zen 4 Ryzen 7000 series was released, and it uses a land grid array like the Intel chips. Okay. Now we're going to move into the publishers. They're some of the main publishers. Ubisoft had a streaming event they call Ubisoft Forward. Skull and Bones was further delayed to March 9th of 2023. We had a 15-year of anniversary of Assassin's Creed, which gave us a bunch of new announcements. We have free DLC for Valhalla, a new game, Mirage, which is being set in Iraq, which is kind of in a traditional Assassin's Creed style, which will be interesting to see. A documentary on the 15 years of the franchise, and Jade, which is a China location-based mobile game, which will be open world. We also got announcements of some of their upcoming future stuff, in addition, that are more in kind of like early naming and conceptual phases, where we have Red, which is going to be a Japan focused one in kind of a I can move on to here actually, which is Red, which is a Japan focused Odyssey style game, so more of like an RPG style mechanics. A Assassin's Creed Hex, which is, they say, something completely different, and then Assassin's Creed Infinity, which is going to be a hub that they're going to create in some way that is going to tie to Red and Hex. We'll need to hear more about those things. They didn't reveal too much about it. Ubisoft is also making 3 exclusive mobile games for Netflix. We get Valiant Hearts 2, Mighty Quest, and a unannounced title and series with Assassin's Creed. Netflix is also starting a game studio in Helsinki, Finland, and bought a company, Next Games, also based in Finland. I just tied that in because it sounds like Netflix is kind of in the process of transitioning into a game publisher, game platform. We'll have to see exactly how this all turns out. EA announced Wild Hearts, which is a Monster Hunter-like game, and at one point it says it will be available on Gen 5 consoles. The reason I bring this up is that this is a topic that is a bit confusing, and I would like to elaborate on this, but it just highlights that these kinds of things happen, but also that there's a lot of confusion over what we should call the current gen. This comes from from marketing material that was released on the date of the game's announcement, and it is now immortalized on Twitter. Okay, and now we have other news. So this is kind of our more general news section. There's just going to be a bunch of different news from a bunch of different topics, some larger topics, some lighter topics. The Saudis are looking to make a major move into games by 2020 or 2030. Savvy Games Group, which is a Saudi government-backed and owned by a state organization conglomerate, has announced plans to spend $37.8 billion in games, with nearly a third being set aside to acquire a leading game publisher. $18.6 billion will be used to make minority stakes into other game companies that support their development agenda. The rest of the money seems to be for creating up to 250 game companies across the country, with a goal of creating nearly 40,000 jobs. This plan has seemingly already been put into action earlier this year, as they had purchased stakes in Embracer Group, Nintendo, Capcom, and Nexon. There's a continuing fight for game preservation. In this case, Atlas is suing a community of fans who have been hosting servers of a game that was officially shut down. The game in question is Shin Megami Tensei Imagine Online, which ended in 2014 in North America and 2016 in Japan. Fans have come together as a project Reimagine in 2020 to revive the dead game, and Atlas is not pleased and suing. At this time, Atlas has sued 2 of the hosting parties, but not Reimagine the group itself, as they have shut down their servers and website voluntarily. This appears to be taking place over US copyright law, where there have been previous cases in favor of game preservation. However, in the case, the 2 accused groups have been said to have created a server emulator, and emulation may not be protected by the courts, so we'll have to see how that turns out. Fighting terrorism in games. So the Department of Homeland Security was awarded nearly $700,000 to as a grant to research and study terrorism and extremist groups in games. They're hoping to understand how extremists have used games to train and recruit new people to their causes. In recent years, there's been an increase in hate groups using games for the purposes that have been stated. The ever increasing battle over pricing of games is starting to move in an upwards direction. Upwards meaning pricier. Ubisoft has now joined Sony, who announced this for their own first-party titles in 2020, alongside some others as well, that its larger consoles will now be priced at $70 US. They also announced that this would be a game-to-game based pricing model, as Assassin's Creed Mirage, which they consider to be a smaller title, will instead just be $50. The standard price for games for the past several generations has been $60 US, which was a significant decrease from earlier cartridge-based consoles at between $80 and $100. This has become more expensive to produce. We'll get into that later. Skyrim is also launching for $70 on Switch. It also does, however, include all the DLC and some other content, and this reflects the $20 cost to upgrade the special edition to the new anniversary edition. And here's some more kind of rapid things. People have found that AI voice has become good enough now for studios to consider instead of using voice actors. This was reported from news.com.au, also known as Good Luck Have Fun. Ninja Theory apparently says that they're using it for placeholder content in response to the article, but the advancement of such technology has been seen to become possible direction that people could move forward in. If you watch Corridor Digital's videos using the AI voice simulation, it's pretty impressive. Anti-dev stuff. So there's been Respawn, who makes Apex Legends, had to put out a statement on Twitter telling players to stop harassing members of their dev team. Many other companies showed their support, and this is just the most recent statement in a bunch of that have come out against multiple game developers. Publishers and funding. Vox Pop Games, which is an indie storefront, has announced a game fund for and has brought on a Rockstar former VP to advise. YouTuber Donkey, also known as Video Game Donkey, has also started his own publishing company with his wife, Leah B. Hacking news, we have GTA 6 and Diablo 4 got leaked. In London, police arrested a 17-year-old who is now accused of the Rockstar hack. In lead up to that, the FBI had announced that they would be investigating. And Plex was also hacked in that month, and 2K emails were also hacked. Some of 2K's emails had also been hacked. So a lot of hacking activity in the last month, unfortunately. Arcane has now become the first show based on games to win an Emmy. We also got the first trailer for Last of Us as a TV show. So there's some movement on games on TV. Some of the big news to come out of the Nintendo Direct, but also kind of just around the industry, was that GoldenEye, 007 GoldenEye, the N64 game, is finally getting a re-release after many, many years. There will be two versions of it, one which will be on Switch and will have online multiplayer, and one which will be on Xbox Game Pass, which will only have local multiplayer, but will be in 4K and have achievements. We have a bunch of other little milestones here. The British Film Institute is now including video and VR games to its initiative to preserve and focus and advocate for the value of screen culture. The Yakuza series is being rebranded to the Japanese title Like a Dragon. Limited Run Games also begins a publishing company, but this is in the form of a book publisher, as Press Run. It was the 40th anniversary of the emote, which was first done at Carnegie Mellon University. Intel and Broadcom also demonstrated Wi-Fi 7, even though Wi-Fi 6 is barely out the door. USB 4 2.0 is coming out with up to 80 gigabytes per second speeds. Embracer Group is reuniting Crystal Dynamics with the Tomb Raider IP now that it owns both. Star Citizen's funding is now at over $500 million. There was information that a YouTuber, Dan Allen Gaming, broke NDAs to leak information and then report on it. Let's see, what else is interesting here? There is a new VMU unit, which is the virtual visual memory unit. The Dreamcast basically had a small, tiny game console that would plug in and be also used as a memory card. A company is trying to revive this idea by creating a new version of it with a backlight for the LCD, USB-C port, better battery, etc. Snapchat, Snap Inc., owner of Snapchat rather, is laying off 20% of its workers and stopping all investment in video games. They had previously launched a game platform in 2019, having partnered with Zynga and Spryfox. In unionization news, Anemone Hug, Anemone Hug is the first Canadian developer to form a union. Nintendo worker Aston Carter was also fired in relation to comments about unionization. a bunch of different companies are getting into crypto. I don't think it's necessary to talk about that right now. And there were a bunch of game conferences, which is where a lot of this news came out of. And we also got the information that E3 would be returning next year. And that is the news. So at this point, I will go back through and give some of my insights and opinions on what's going on. And maybe you'll find this information useful. In the future, this is where I would also get comments from the previous month or from the live stream or what have you and talk about that. But obviously this is the first time around and that is unlikely to have happened. So let's go back to the beginning. What do we have to say about this? Anything? I guess just some additional details. When you buy stocks of certain Japanese companies and some other companies that are doing business in markets outside of North America, you can buy shares in effectively like a pool. They call them American Depository Receipts. And so NTDOY, which is one of the stocks for the Nintendo in our markets, is 1/8 of a share. So that's why you might see the pricing to be quite different from the 4.1 thousand that it is in Japan. I think it's interesting that they ended up postponing the this out of respect for the Queen's passing. I don't think it was a necessary move, but it's certainly an interesting one. And it's great to finally see a date, a hard date and a name for the game, although I wish that we had seen a bit more footage. Gacha's been seemingly going out the door for a while, partly because of regulations from various countries. It has been a very effective model. I have used it. I'm sure many other developers have in the past. There are ways in which you can do it that are more rewarding and less punishing, and ways that you can do it that aren't truly gambling. But the standard is to make it a gambling model and therefore more profitable. It's understandable in a capitalist economy. I don't personally love it. So it's interesting to see that that Nintendo is effectively doing away with it. I don't think it's due to profit. I think it's probably due to them just realizing, like, yes, we can make money in this way, but we don't really think it's a good way to go, and we would like to stand behind that. So we're just going to start by removing it. But we'll see. Maybe it's just a test. Not much to say on these things. This one's more interesting to talk about. So I've seen a lot of things online. I've heard a lot of people talk about this. $300, which will be $350 rather, after launch. Many people are saying that's quite high for a streaming-only console. And in some ways, yeah, it is, but only because we now have the Steam Deck out and it's able to show that, like, you can get a lot more with just a little bit more money. I don't think that this price point would have been at all in question in like a year or two ago, before the Steam Deck came out and that it wasn't really like fully announced yet. Streaming to a handheld is kind of a thing that's being done on a couple of different consoles now. Like you have Nintendo doing some cloud-based games, and obviously Steam with their Steam Deck. And it's showing that it's now at least somewhat viable. There are obviously downsides to a streaming-only console. It would be nice if they had the ability to download at least a title locally. But you can see the appeal to it. we'll have to see kind of like how it actually performs when it comes out. And I think that will make the biggest difference in terms of whether or not this is a good price. If it turns out to be like extremely well spec'd for the size and it doesn't have much latency, etc., it could be a fully reasonable price. But it's unlikely that the market as a whole is really going to buy it at that price, given that there are other options like a Switch and the Steam Deck if you want to spring for a bit more money and do streamed games. Streamed or local, really. But yeah, I mean, basically, like, do you want a full mini PC for only a couple $100 more? Or do you want, for around the same price, a full console that doesn't need to be connected to the internet 100% of the time? So it puts itself in a really hard place by putting it at that price point. Not much to say about that. The acquisition has been interesting to follow. Sony has been very outspoken against it for obviously their own reasons. Whether that makes sense or not, we will have to see. My personal feeling is there's a bit too much consolidation going on right now, and that's going to end up stifling a lot of creativity. I know a lot of these larger companies are saying, oh no, this is going to help creativity because now they won't be bound by restraints of their own budget, but that's not exactly accurate. As we've seen in many cases in the past, the opposite tends to happen. But we'll see. Hopefully that does not come to pass. Oh yeah, so the PSVR stuff. This is interesting. So they said it is not going to be compatible with PSVR 1, only be compatible with PSVR 2 games. And they kind of gave BS reasons as to why. So you're saying that at one point, hey, this is a brand new thing, and at the same time you're saying it's got a, like, well, what is the new stuff? Well, it's a new controller with haptic feedback and adaptive triggers. It's like, well, yeah, so is the PlayStation console controller, and it's backwards compatible too with previous stuff. And like the Knuckles grip controllers, for the Knuckles controllers, which I don't know what they're called officially now, but that's what the name was prior to them being launched. The Steam headset controllers, which have like the individual finger tracking, again, fully backwards compatible with other games. So it's not like you couldn't make that work. Eye tracking, sure, but if the previous games didn't use it, it's not like having it off is going to make them unplayable. So none of the technologies that they've brought out really truly would stop it from being backwards compatible. In fact, if anything, it would just be like, oh yeah, it's just a switch that you can say, oh yes, we want this on or off. They're obviously doing it because they want people to like do an HD remastering of it effectively for the newer headset, so that they get more money out of it rather than any other reason. That's effectively the only reason I can see, other than them just choosing not to support developers, which is the other thing here. Is like, either they just did not give the tool set to the developers to allow for them to like fix the features that aren't hooked up in the original games so that it would just work, in which case they're just being lazy, or they're being greedy and they're just saying, we don't want to make it backwards compatible so that people have to do extra work to do an upscaled version of it so that we can get more money. So Steam stuff is kind of the same. The dock looks cool. It's probably something that should have come out initially, but I guess they wanted to see how the Steam Deck would do before they sold an accessory for it. Although this would have been a no-brainer to have bundled with the console at purchase, and I feel like they probably lost some potential sales by not having that at the get-go. But anyways, yeah, Stadia. The writing was on the wall for this for a very, very long time. The fact that the like initial, I was at this GTC, I immediately thought that it was going to fail, but the handheld, the controller felt great. That's the one thing about it. This controller is awesome. Feeling it's like what I wanted as a step up from like the 360 controller that I've liked to use for my PC forever. It's comfortable, but it was new. Yeah, so effectively they had this presentation where they put themselves alongside the Dreamcast, which failed, the Power Glove, which failed, and Atari's ET, which failed, kind of seemingly like saying, we are going to fail, but we're like trying to do this. We knowingly are going to fail so that we can then take what we learned from this and use it in other projects. And that seems to be what's going on now. There's not really much more to say about that. It is unfortunate that there will be a couple of games probably that will not be able to be playable ever after this closes down because they were made specifically for the tech that was involved for Stadia. But there was like a bunch of like hints that this is going to happen for a while. And the model they chose to do with the subscription so that you could then buy a game and then kind of changing that after the fact. And it was just kind of a messy way to go about it. Probably wouldn't have been successful in the way that they were trying to roll it out at all. And it kind of goes to the larger kind of topic about these consoles that are being announced right now and also how Stadia has failed. People were saying when Stadia was shown, like they've been saying for the last like 10 years, that consoles are dead, that they're not going to exist after this. They said that when the PlayStation announced a digital version and like when Game Pass was announced, and before that when you could download titles on the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. But that's extremely unrealistic. And there's a lot of reasons for that. You have your kind of primary markets where these things are like aimed for, right? Where you have these big cities, lots of people, good infrastructure. This is where most of your like media outlets are going to be located, where most of your main manufacturing companies are located, where like most of the news is buzzing around. And they all see kind of like just as far as they can. They don't really look outside of that often when they're making these kinds of remarks. But the reality is, if you go to suburban areas where you can barely get internet speeds of like even up to 50 gigabytes per second, megabytes per second, in many rural places, I've seen internet speeds as low as like 5 megabytes per second as being the max in some areas when I did a list, kind of like cursory glance. You can't kill physical media when there's large swaths of the country that just cannot access it if it's online only. And this is something that I don't think a lot of people realize or really like think about. And it's not just so you have like your primary markets where you're going to make most of your money. You have like the Americas, you have the EU, Great Britain, the British Isles, and then like Japan and China. And they overall have relatively good internet infrastructure. But then you have the secondary markets which don't have anywhere near as good infrastructure on a whole. And it's similar to the rural areas where it's like, well, you can't expect that we're going to be able to move straight off and just be like, okay, no, we're doing 100% streaming or 100% digital downloads now, because it's just not realistic. We're as a world, let alone as countries, we don't have the infrastructure prepared to truly move off physical. And so it's kind of one of those weird things. Like, yeah, like Stadia could have theoretically worked with the right pricing model. It was the right company to kind of try it at the right time, but they didn't really play with the model enough to really get a point where they could have actually made a profit. They gave up on their own publishing arm very, very early. You could tell it wasn't going to happen, but it's not that it couldn't happen, but it would not be the primary thing. It would not kill consoles. It's definitely like we're many years from that in terms of technology. Anyways, just a bit of a rant there. And then it's kind of funny that they're also launching a different way to access games from their platform on PC, but this time instead of streaming, they're doing it through apps so that at least they can get some more profit from games, but it's not going to be in the same way, obviously. Just interesting. Web3 stuff, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the big news about this, you've probably heard it already. Obviously, the two different versions of the 4080 being extremely different, like there's literally nothing about them that's the same other than the name 4080, does kind of indicate that they were attempting to create a more expensive 4070, and that would have just thrown everything out of whack, especially with current pricing coming down as it is, due to lots of reasons, but primarily that mining is no longer effective in the crypto market, which was a huge swath of the last few last few generations of sales for GPUs. And we're kind of like at the end of a generation where there's now like a glut of cards. So pricing is starting to come down, obviously. And like the performance of these is better, but we're again at a point where like the PC is so far beyond where consoles are, especially with these new cards, that it's like questionable as to whether or not you should even bother investing that much money, because most game companies are not going to be trying to make games that run on a 4090. They're making games that run on a PS5 or a Xbox Series X as their kind of top spec. And so if it runs on those, it should run on a 4090 pretty much no problem, because the 4090 itself is far higher specs than the whole console basically at this point. But that's kind of how things have been going for a while. And the same thing was true in the last few generations. Really, the pricing was driven up by the shortage due to COVID stuff and factories shutting down, and obviously due to the crypto market. So yeah. This one again, like there's so little information on this right now. We will have to wait until there's more information about it. So tomorrow. Yeah, the new Intel stuff looks pretty good so far. If you're looking at a good cheap-ish. I mean, graphics cards these days just aren't cheap. The pricing has inflated so much. You used to be able to get a graphics card for like $300 and it would be like a great card, and now it's like, no, you have to pay like $400 plus. Anyways, for that like nice kind of reasonable range of price, if you also have relatively new hardware from like a motherboard and CPU standpoint, these look like they're a good option to go with if you're mostly playing newer games. And that's good to see that there's at least some competition in the space, and that competition is at the low end, because although it would be nice if they competed more at the high end, the fact that they're kind of competing kind of in the mid-range should help drive pricing down at the mid-range level, which I think is a better thing for everybody, because that's where on average most people are buying like a 3060, not a 3080 kind of thing, right? There's a diminishing return and price to performance and stuff like that. Anyways, and also just like the things are getting expensive. So yeah, I'm excited to see that they're actually putting together or put something on the table that looks at least somewhat competitive with an angle in this market here. It would have been nice to have seen it be a little bit more polished, but it was unlikely to have happened since they're new to this. I think that they're going to need a lot of software updates, and that will come, but that's going to come when they get the data from the vast market. So yeah, not much about this yet, so we'll hear about how that looks when it gets announced. I'm excited to see a new Assassin's Creed title in the original style. That was the style I preferred. I really liked the classic style of games. I wish that they had done these new ones, but they had done them as like a spin-off rather than having them be the main series. But we'll see what they do with it from here on out. I don't really have much to say about any of these things. Oh yeah, this. Gen 5, man. So that's pretty far off in kind of every way possible. You could maybe say that this is the 5th generation of modern consoles, if you wanted to say something like that. But this does bring up a big discussion that I would like to have at some point. I think that there needs to be a brand new look at what makes a console generation so that we can kind of like push aside all the marketing stuff and be able to see through it to what truly marks a full generation of technology advancing. There's a couple of good points in our current schema of generations where there really was like another generation that occurred, or there was a generation that didn't occur when people say they occurred. That I think really should be looked at is particularly in the what we call second generation and in what we call the 8th generation. I think 8th generation. But the second generation being you had the Atari 2600, the Intellivision, ColecoVision, and Atari 5200, and a bunch of others, all in this generation. But obviously, like, well, if Atari came out with a 2600 and then a 5200, there's clearly some kind of a change in what they were doing. And if you look at like a 2600 compared to like the ColecoVision, they're really in totally different ballparks in terms of specs, in terms of capabilities. It doesn't make a lot of sense to keep them in the same generation. There's a lot of other little things like the Atari 2600 control schemes wise. Went from very simplistic controls, joystick and button, and then as the console generation evolved, we suddenly had these controllers that were effectively like a phone. They had like a whole number pad and a joystick controller, and like even that could be considered the one of the main main differences between the two different generations that occurred in that time period. But I mean, there's a whole bunch of things like that should be examined. Again, some people were saying that the Switch was in the same generation as the Xbox One and the Xbox Series, the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 and Wii U. But the Wii U was Nintendo's offering for that generation, not the Switch. The Switch was clearly a different and step up in technology, and was after around the same 5-year mark that most console generations have kind of followed, and kind of coincides with these like Xbox One X and PS4 Pro, which you could almost say was like another generation that happened. So it would be like Switch, Xbox One X, PS4 Pro as a generation, rather than saying that they're the same generation, because really when you're going from a technology difference from like 1080p to 4K, or you're going from like a 1080p console that is just that has, well, anyways, you have varying degrees of the technology advancing, but you have a clear jump in technology. And so I think there needs to be better, I think there should be a discussion. I think we should have a discussion. We should try to figure out what is this thing we call a console generation. How should we define these generations? We shouldn't let the companies push these rhetorics, because like it doesn't really make sense. They're trying to do it. The companies will always try to make themselves sound better than what is actually happening in reality. And so they're going to try to position their thing to sound like it's next gen, even if it isn't. Or they're going to try to position themselves like they are creating the next generation and that the other stuff isn't, because they want to be kind of like seen as their own race, their own category. So yeah, anyways, I think this should be a larger discussion, and that's all I have to say about that. That's all I have to say about that right now. This is interesting. We'll see how that pans out. 40,000 jobs is a lot. It will be interesting to see what kind of games they build. I'm very curious about who they're going after for this giant acquisition, and I'm a little bit worried because we'll see how that turns out. Yeah, game pricing. I mean, okay, here's a controversial opinion. Games should be way more expensive than they are right now. Do I pay more for games? No, I pay the sale price like everybody else. But games have gotten like extremely expensive to make, like way more expensive than they've ever been in the past. So it doesn't make sense for the costs for purchasing them to be remaining so low. At the same time, we've gone from generation to generation, increasing the technology, increasing the cost of the hardware, and yet we've been reducing costs of the sales. So all we're doing is undercutting our own industry by doing this. We're saying our games aren't worth investing all this money that we've been investing. And so that's kind of kept the industry in the state where you have a lot of people who are not getting paid very well. We get long hours with no overtime pay. And that's the only way that we can be sustainable right now, because we've undercut our own costs to the point where people won't buy a game for more than $30 or $40 in most cases. So we brought what was like an $80 to $100 game in the past, with inflation would be like a $250 or something dollar game today. And instead of allowing it to go up with inflation, what we've done is the opposite, and we cut back to $60. So we've effectively halved it, not including inflation and not including this ballooning cost to make games, where back in the day, like on an N64 game or whatever, companies would rarely have more than 20 or 30 people working on a game, whereas now you have hundreds or thousands of people building some of these AAA games. So I think it's crazy that there's been so much backlash around this, because it really, if you want to see more games at higher quality, or at the quality that games are trying to be produced at now, you have to expect that price needs to go up at some point. I think it makes sense to do what Ubisoft's doing and have a tiered model where we go, okay, we want to build games with our IP that's in a lower bracket. They're smaller games, maybe a 20 to 30 hour game instead of a 120 to 200 hour game. And we can use a smaller team to develop it. We can keep the quality good. We can keep the price on that one lower, though, and we can put that out and have that be sustainable. But if we're going to release one of these larger games, we can't reasonably charge that lowered price. So I think it makes sense for companies to do more of this kind of tiered look. And I think it would be great to see more companies embrace the idea of having smaller projects and larger projects with different price points and different expectations, because I think that that's what's kind of necessary to push the industry forward at this point. We've gotten to this point where the industry is so the main companies in the industry are so large that the games cost so much that if a single title fails, it the whole company could go under. The costs are so extreme. If something just comes out the door and outright fails, you've invested so many millions and millions of dollars that it can be hard to keep the company alive, or at least keep that team fully intact post that event. And I think it makes sense to have a bunch of smaller teams alongside one or two large teams doing their own smaller games that can help you keep a constant flow of money, so that you can try something big every now and then and not require it to be an outright success. So it doesn't have to be formulaic, etc. Anyways, I do applaud that they are doing this kind of we will look and see which games make sense for what cost. I hope that they are able to stick with the price increase and that people will buy it and feel like it's worth it at that price. I think it's going to take a long time before people come around to that. And I mean, with the race to the bottom we've had in pricing over the years, where we've gone from apps being $5 on phones to being $3, then $2, then $1 with in-app purchases, then free with in-app purchases, or free with ads. And that same kind of thing has happened in the digital space, where back in the day, Steam would do a Steam sale and everybody would price their game at like $1 or like 90% off, just to get like a huge spike for like a short period of time. And luckily that's been kind of like pulled back a bit, because people started realizing, well, wait, we're basically just giving our games away for free at this point, and it's not sustainable. It's not good for us if our competitors are doing this, so we shouldn't do this, because it's just not gonna, it doesn't work. Anyways, then people just expect that your game is only worth 10% of what your actual price is, and it just devalues you, it devalues your product. Anyways, there's a lot to be discussed about this. That's my opinion on it. It's a bit controversial, I know. Games are way too cheap. That's kind of what I'm trying to say, based on the amount of effort, the amount of money that goes into making these things. I'm sure you have other opinions. Feel free to come at me. Well, don't actually, but I'm open to discussion about these points. Feel free to leave me some comments, and we'll see where it goes. Is there anything else to talk about? Not really. That's kind of it. So there's other stuff I would have liked to have gotten to. Obviously, this is pretty rough looking still. There's like a bunch of stuff I'd like to have nailed down a bit better. This is my first go around. Next time I hope to be a lot closer to the beginning of the next month. So for October's news, it should hopefully happen at the very beginning of November. Wow, we're already at November, or almost at November. So that's my hope, is to get it like within the first week of the next month. It does take a while to kind of compile all of the data, go through all the different websites and videos and stuff, and get just the main ideas. But yeah, that's my hope. And thank you all for watching this, and please give me some comments if you're interested in seeing more of this. Next time I will make this more public than it is. I think this is just a kind of test for myself, more than it is for anybody else at this stage. But hopefully this works out. I think that this is a good thing for us to have, that we can have like a record that we can look at of various events and things that have happened. It's hard to compile all that these days with so much news coming out, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to kind of curate that. So thank you very much, and we will see you next month.